This is part 2 of the Big Lie. Any knowledgeable geologist will admit that in reality there are many contradictions to the supposed sequence of the geologic column. For instance, fossils of an earlier age are often found to be out of order by being deposited among fossils that are supposed to be of a much later age, and frequently fossils appear in the column millions of years before they even were supposed to exist. There are also those geological embarrassments of fossilized trees that have been found still standing erect, piercing one strata after another, though the geologic column alleges to be tens of millions of years old. There are many, many contradictions in the geologic column. For instance, there are places in Arizona and Rhodesia where pictographs have been found drawn by human hands on the walls of caves and canyons showing dinosaurs. Add to this the examples of numerous fossilized footprints of humans and dinosaurs found side by side in Mexico, New Mexico, Arizona, Missouri, Kentucky, Illinois, and other locations, and it becomes apparent that man and dinosaur coexisted at the same time, though they are supposed to be separated by hundreds of millions of years. The evidence abounds. For instance, on June 1, 1968, in Utah, a man named William Meister found fossils of several trilobites in the fossilized sandaled footprint of a man, and Dr. Clifford Burdick, a geologist, found footprints of a barefooted child, one of which contained the remains of a crushed trilobite. But according to the evolutionary timetable, trilobites became extinct around 230 million years before the appearance of man. The subject of fossils presents some problems to the evolutionary geologist because they believe that the fossilization occurred over millions of years as water or wind slowly covered the remains of animals and plants with sedentary deposits of dirt and sand. This theory is obviously an error because if evolution is an ongoing process, then fossilization would still be occurring. However, with only a handful of exceptions, fossilization is no longer taking place anywhere in the world today. To illustrate this point, when walking along the ocean shore, one does not encounter large or even small deposits of dead fish and marine life in various stages of fossilization. As a matter of fact, thanks to scavengers and natural organic deterioration, the ocean bottom is devoid of marine carcasses, although thousands of tons of marine life die daily. Likewise, our forests are also devoid of new fossil evidence. Regardless of whether you dig in the salty sand by the ocean or the rich humus of the woodland, two things will become apparent. Animal remains are rarely found, and new fossilized remains of plants or animals are not to be found anywhere. This will further illustrate why the occurrence of the fossil record by sedimentary deposits over millions of years cannot be valid. Suppose that a layer of silt were deposited by natural processes over the body of a hand-sized fish 1/2 inch thick at the rate of 1/32 inch per year. At that rate, it would take 16 years to cover that fish. Would you care to calculate how long it would take to cover an elephant or a whale? Do you have any idea why scavengers would ignore such a meal? What could have interrupted the natural process of deterioration? Presented from this perspective, the fossilization of plants and animals over millions of years become ludicrous. Yet the fossil record exists, layer upon layer, infused with the remains of every life form that ever existed. What could possibly explain this mystery? Why are layers of fossils separated from other layers of fossils by sedimentary deposits that are sometimes many hundreds of feet thick? If evolution is an ongoing process, then the fossil record would not appear in layers as deposits, but rather as a continuous record sprinkled throughout the Earth's crust from day one until now. What could be the answer to this and other mysteries concerning the fossil record? The muddy floody. There is only one logical explanation: the Genesis flood. What else could account for geological formations and features found in the world, such as the fossil record, that indicate a sudden catastrophic flood deposit? For instance, the Karoo Formation in Africa, that contains the fossil remains of an estimated 800 billion vertebrate animals. In California, there is a fossil deposit that contains an estimated 1 billion fish in an area only 4 miles square. In Colorado, tens of thousands of fossilized bones of rhinoceros, camels, giant wild boars, and many other animals are all mixed up together in a huge tangle. Obviously, such fossil deposits are not the result of natural occurrences taking place over eons of time, but rather from the cataclysmic events resulting from a great flood. The evidence for a flood that covered the earth is not only found in science and the Bible, but in the written records of ancient civilizations such as the Babylonians and the Sumerians. There are also flood traditions from primitive tribes throughout the world. The Genesis flood is one of the best confirmed events in history. The Genesis account of such a flood is found in the 6th and 7th chapters of Genesis. Chapter 7, verses 20 through 21 state, "The waters rose and covered the mountains to a depth of more than 20 feet. Every living thing that moved on the earth perished, birds, livestock, wild animals, and all the creatures that swarm over the earth, and all mankind." The Genesis flood was the cataclysmic event that brought about the mass death and destruction, depositing the remains of every living thing over the entire face of the earth. Only such an event can explain the rapid deposit of sediments, and one layer was deposited upon another layer by the rapid rushing and swirling currents. According to Dr. Henry M. Morris, a creation geologist, hydraulic analysis shows that, in most formations, the individual stratum has been formed within minutes of time. Furthermore, there is evidence to suggest that each subsequent stratum began to be deposited immediately after the preceding one. Frequently, The newer deposits were laid down by currents coming from different directions, causing what is called cross-bedding. This is often evidenced in sandstone and shale formations by ripples appearing in the host deposit at different angles than found in the preceding deposit. Try to imagine the event of the flood. Every day for 40 days and 40 nights, the torrents of rain poured upon the earth, creating thousands of rushing rivers which melted hillsides, filling valleys, and sweeping away anything in their paths as they roared and twisted on their way to the rapidly expanding sea. This would explain the apparent progression of fossil deposits found in the geologic record. As velocity of the raging floodwaters slowed down in the deeper seas, their cargo of mud and sand was deposited over the small bottom-dwelling marine life and crustaceans. And as the turbulence of the floodwaters increased, larger marine creatures such as fish, sharks, and alligators were caught in the onslaught of mud, sand, and stone, becoming part of the fossil record. The rivers continued to rise, carrying away more and more land, only to be deposited somewhere else. With the rising of the water, land animals fled for higher ground as the smaller and slower animals such as reptiles, were swept away to take their place in the fossil record. In the latter stages of the flood, the higher ground dwindled in size as millions of animals crowded together seeking refuge. The water continued to rise, and the swift currents grabbed their victims, sweeping them away, dumping their bodies in the vast deposit to become a memorial in stone. Animals were not the only victims of the flood. Virtually all trees and vegetation were uprooted and carried away, only to be covered by tons of mud and stone. These deposits of vegetation would become the coal veins that would someday heat homes and factories. Evolutionists tell us that the coal existed millions of years before man evolved. However, human skeletons and artifacts such as intricately made gold chains have been found in the coal deposits, proving that man existed even before coal was formed. Genesis 4:22 tells us that a man named Tubal-Cain, who forged all kinds of tools out of bronze and iron, his ancestors were the ones who were caught in the flood. This is the end of part 2.